The ruins of Sparta may have faded into silence, but the myth remained immortal. For centuries, writers, generals, and hulaires invoked the name of Sparta as a symbol, not just of military excellence, but of order, sacrifice, and iron discipline. What Sparta had built was not just a city, but a story powerful enough to outlive its stones. Long after its fall, Sparta continued to shape imaginations. In Roman times, emperors like Augustus and Hadrian visited the remnants of the once feared city. They admired its simplicity, its devotion to law, its rejection of luxury. Rituals were revived, more for spectacle than belief. Spartan boys were still flogged at the altar of Artemis Orthia, not to prepare them for war, but to entertain foreign guests. Sparta had become a museum of its former self, a stage where the past was reenacted for a fascinated audience. But it was not just the Romans who kept the myth alive. Early Christians, while critical of pagan practices, often respected the Spartan moral code, its emphasis on duty, self-denial, and communal loyalty. Later, Renaissance thinkers rediscovered classical texts and looked to Sparta as an ideal of civic virtue. Philosophers debated its merits. Was it a cruel society of slaves and masters, or a pure republic free from corruption? In the Enlightenment, Sparta found new admirers. Jean-Jacques Rousseau praised the Spartan model as an antidote to decadent luxury. He argued that true freedom could only come through shared sacrifice and collective will. Sparta, to him, was not a relic, it was a blueprint. Meanwhile, others saw only tyranny, a place where individual liberty was crushed beneath the weight of conformity. In the 18th and 19th centuries, nationalist movements across Europe romanticized Sparta. Military academies invoked its training methods. Leaders referenced Leonidas and Thermopylae in speeches meant to rouse patriotic fire. The myth evolved again, now a symbol of heroic last stands, of choosing death over dishonor, of loyalty unto death. When modern Greece was born in the 19th century, the name Ars Sparta was restored. A new town was built near the ancient ruins and given the ancient name Sparti. Statues were erected. Streets were renamed. The past was woven into the fabric of the present. But what of the real Sparta? What did all the myth leave behind? The truth is darker and more complicated. Sparta's military success was real, but fragile. It was built on a narrow population base, a brutal system of slavery, and a cultural rigidity that could not adapt to change. While other city-states innovated in politics, art, commerce, and science, Sparta turned inward, seeking strength in sameness. Its unique dual monarchy created stability, but also confusion. When unity was most needed, kings often clashed. Power struggles between ephors, councils, and kings sometimes paralyzed decision-making. The system that had once preserved balance became a cage. Its economy, based on helot labor and barred from wealth accumulation, proved brittle. As trade expanded elsewhere in Greece, Sparta stagnated. When helot lands were lost, the system imploded. And with so many citizens excluded for failing to meet standards, the population collapsed from within. Even its vaunted military power had limits. Spartan hoplites were unmatched in formation combat, but inflexible. They struggled against new tactics and could not replace losses quickly. After Leuctra, the illusion of invincibility vanished, and with it, much of Sparta's political influence. And yet, the discipline remained. The memory of what Sparta had been, or what it claimed to be, carried weight for centuries, not because of what it won, but because of what it symbolized. That raises a question. Was Sparta a success or a warning? It produced the most fearsome soldiers in the ancient world, men who could march in silence, die without hesitation, and fight as one. It created a society free from internal chaos for centuries, with little crime, no civil wars, and unwavering loyalty to the state. But at what cost? It enslaved the majority of its population. It suppressed innovation. It treated individuality as a threat. It lived in constant fear of revolt. And in the end, it could not survive change. The same rigidity that gave Sparta strength also made it brittle. What made Sparta great also made it vulnerable. And yet, the myth endures. Because Sparta tells us something universal. It is the story of how far a society can go in the name of unity. How deeply a people can believe in an ideal. How strength, when unchecked, can become a prison. And how even the mightiest cities can crumble, not from without, but from within. The stones remain silent, but the name lives on. The name Sparta lives on because it stands at the crossroads of admiration and caution. It has become more than a city of the past. It is an idea projected into every era that followed. For warriors, it is the model of discipline. For political theorists, the extreme of collectivism. For historians, a rare experiment in suppressing the individual for the sake of the whole. Military academies across centuries adopted Spartan ideals. In Prussia, France, Britain, and later the United States, the agoge was admired for its brutal clarity. Train hard, suffer early, obey completely. Young cadets were taught stories of Leonidas, told to memorize the code of silence, to internalize pain without flinching. The lessons were not just about history, they were about character. Modern totalitarian regimes too took inspiration from Sparta. Fascist Italy under Mussolini openly referenced Spartan principles: collective strength, physical fitness, national pride, and the subjugation of the weak. Nazi Germany saw in Sparta a racial model, a small elite ruling over an inferior majority. Hitler himself reportedly admired how Sparta controlled its Helot population and drew parallels to his own goals. It was a perverse interpretation, but it proved how adaptable the myth was, how easily it could be twisted. Meanwhile, liberal democracies struggled to place Sparta. It conflicted with their ideals of freedom, expression, and equality. Yet it also fascinated. Here was a people who had chosen order over liberty, sacrifice over pleasure, silence over speech, and had thrived for a time. Could there be lessons in that? Or only warnings? Philosophers continued to argue. Was the Spartan system an ideal of balance and virtue, or an oppressive regime that reduced its citizens to tools of the state? Plato admired Sparta's stability. Aristotle criticized its economic structure and lack of adaptability. Montesquieu saw it as the opposite of Rome, rigid where Rome was flexible, inward where Rome was outward. Sparta, he wrote, could never become an empire because it could not tolerate change. And Sparta could not change. Its education system did not evolve. Its economy remained closed. Its population crisis worsened century after century. As others grew through trade, invention, and colonization, Sparta relied on memory, on what it once was. Even its women, so often praised for their relative freedoms, were trapped in contradictions. Yes, they had power, but only because men were absent. Yes, they owned land, but only to manage it for the state. Their strength was not for themselves, but to serve a militarized society. When that society fell, their roles collapsed too. In art and literature, Sparta re-emerged again and again. In the 19th and 20th centuries, writers and filmmakers revived its image. The story of Thermopylae became the ultimate underdog tale, a few against many, a stand against tyranny, a sacrifice that echoed forever. Leonidas, his final stand, has been told, and retold in books, films, and classrooms. The most famous modern version, stylized and exaggerated, brought Sparta into popular culture like never before. But behind the shouting warriors and slow-motion battles is a quieter truth. The real Sparta did not roar. It whispered. It obeyed. It endured. Its power was not in theatrics, but in its silence. Today, the ruins of ancient Sparta are modest. No grand temples like Athens. No vast theaters like Epidaurus. Just stones and shadows scattered across the valley. And yet, millions still go there. Not to see what is left, but to imagine what once was. They stand where the Eurotas still flows. They look to the Taygetus Mountains rising to the west. They walk the silent fields where boys once trained, where kings once marched, where helots once toiled. The land remembers, even if the stones do not speak. And perhaps that is the final paradox of Sparta. It built a society designed to resist time, and yet it was destroyed by it. But the idea of Sparta, disciplined, defiant, relentless, became timeless. Because deep down, in every age, we ask the same questions. What are we willing to give up for safety? What do we gain by unity? And what do we lose? And if greatness comes through suffering, how much suffering is too much? Sparta forces us to answer, not with words, but with choices. That is why it matters still. As centuries passed, the name Sparta took on a second life, no longer bound by its geography or timeline. It became a metaphor used across disciplines. In sports, Spartan meant resilience, grit, and discipline. In minimalism, it meant rejecting luxury and embracing simplicity. In politics, it was evoked by both authoritarian regimes and democratic leaders, depending on which part of the story they chose to remember. This duality of admiration and fear is what makes Sparta so persistent in the human imagination. It was not just a city, state, it was an extreme. The far end of the spectrum, a society that pushed ideals to their limits and paid the price. In academia, Sparta remained a difficult subject for centuries. Almost all of what was known came from outsiders. The Spartans themselves left behind no literature, no histories, no philosophical treatises. What we know comes from Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, Plutarch, Athenians, Thebans, Romans. Some admired Sparta, others despised it. None were Spartans. This creates a strange silence. The voice of Sparta is always secondhand. We know more about what others thought of Sparta than what Spartans thought of themselves. Their silence, part of their discipline, became a historical void. A city that trained its people to be silent left the loudest echo. Modern archaeology has helped fill some of that silence. Excavations in Laconia and Messenia revealed settlements, sanctuaries, and fortifications. The sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, where boys were whipped before a crowd, has yielded countless votive offerings. Inscriptions, bones, and ruins help piece together the daily life of a people who lived in hardness. But even so, the picture is incomplete. Much of what Sparta was died with it. Still, that void makes Sparta flexible in meaning. Each generation sees what it wants. For those seeking order in chaos, Sparta represents clarity, law, hierarchy, and shared purpose. For those warning against tyranny, Sparta is a grim model of lost humanity, where the state crushes the soul. For educators and coaches, the agoge is a metaphor. Suffer now to succeed later. For the oppressed, the helots remain a symbol of invisible suffering. And so, Sparta endures. Not because it is easy to understand, but because it refuses to be reduced. It resists interpretation, just as it once resisted change. Perhaps the most striking thing about Sparta is that it left behind almost nothing physical, but everything emotional. Its ruins are modest, but its myth is enormous. And in that myth, we are confronted by a mirror. Would we trade comfort for strength? Would we give up freedom for safety? Would we raise our children to obey or to question? Every civilization has to answer. Sparta answered. With silence, with sacrifice, with endurance. And the world still listens. Today, the word Spartan echoes far beyond the valleys of Laconia. It lives in training programs, in creeds, in slogans. It is used to sell discipline, to glorify toughness, to market fitness and self-denial. And yet, most who invoke the word have never touched the truth of what it meant. To live in Sparta was not just to train hard. It was to submit your entire self to the needs of the collective. Your voice, your will, your dreams, all were subordinate to a higher, often unquestioned, authority. From childhood, you were not taught to ask why, only to endure, only to obey, only to die well, if needed. In many ways, it was an experiment in engineered virtue. The Spartans believed they could shape not only the body, but the soul. That law and ritual could forge a better kind of human, one stripped of excess, honed like a blade, clear in purpose, and immune to weakness. And for a time, they succeeded. Their warriors terrified enemies. Their society resisted corruption. Their culture avoided the decadence that often followed power. But the price was steep. They could not adapt. They could not expand their identity. They could only repeat and then collapse. The last true Spartans faded quietly into history. No dramatic fall, no burning of the city, no final conquest. Just erosion. Birth rates fell. Land concentrated in fewer hands. The citizen class dwindled. Foreign armies passed through, uninterested. The silence returned. And yet, from that silence came a legacy louder than most empires. The Spartans gave the world no grand libraries, no cathedrals, no philosophical schools, but they gave it a question, a haunting question that every power must face. What are you willing to sacrifice for greatness? Not every society needs to answer as Sparta did, but every society must at least ask. That is why we return to the story. Not just to admire the courage of Leonidas, not just to analyze the constitution of Lycurgus, not just to measure the reach of hoplite warfare, but to reflect on ourselves. For in Sparta's story, its rise, its rigidity, its victories, and its fall, we glimpse a truth that transcends time. Strength without wisdom fails. Unity without mercy fractures. And power without compassion becomes brittle. Sparta was not a utopia, nor was it a dystopia. It was a choice made by real people on real soil, facing real fears. And that, more than the ruins, more than the myth, is what endures. Sparta, the city that spoke little, still speaks.